Mrs. Eugenia Fontaine was no ordinary woman. She owned one of the largest corporations in Silvergate, a thriving metropolis by the sea. She and her late husband had built the company from the ground up. After his passing, she took on the reins, ensuring the business not only survived but expanded, a testament to her sharp intellect and tenacity. Yet, behind her powerful image, Eugenia felt a persistent loneliness. The vast mansion she called home seemed hollow, and despite her achievements, there was an emptiness no success could fill. At work, people respected her immensely, but she kept a certain distance. She didn't have many friends, and her personal life remained a mystery even to those closest to her. One person who had been part of the company for ages was Gus, the janitor. Gus was nearly invisible to everyone. Quiet, with a worn old cap and clothes dusted from a day's work, he passed through the office halls unnoticed, but he didn't mind. He enjoyed the simplicity of his job, never complained, and greeted anyone who acknowledged him with a warm smile. In his unobtrusive way, Gus observed everything, from the hurried meetings to the way people interacted, though he didn't often understand the jargon of finance and strategy. The anonymity let him do his work without hassle. One evening, as Gus was about to leave, Mrs. Fontaine approached him, a rare occurrence that made him wonder if something was amiss. "Gus," she said in her calm yet authoritative voice, "I'd like to ask you a favor." Gus removed his cap out of respect, puzzled by her request. "Of course, ma'am. What do you need?" Eugenia hesitated, her steely gaze softening for a moment. "There's an important business meeting tomorrow. I'd like you to attend it with me." Gus blinked, certain he'd misheard. "Me, ma'am? I'm just a janitor," he said, scratching his head. "I don't know a thing about business meetings." She gave him a knowing smile, one that held secrets only she knew. "That's precisely why I need you there. I trust you, Gus. You see things with clarity and honesty, and that's what I need." Gus couldn't grasp why she would need him. A simple janitor, in a high-stakes meeting. But her words stayed with him, and after a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "All right, ma'am, I'll be there." The following morning, Gus felt out of place the moment he walked into the gleaming offices of Fontaine Industries. In his old button-down and cap, he was worlds away from the polished, suit-wearing crowd. He made his way to the conference room, aware of the curious glances from those around him. Inside, the tension was thick. Sitting opposite Mrs. Fontaine was Ezra Langston, a sharp-tongued executive who had made a name for himself in the city. Beside him sat his assistant, an aloof woman scribbling notes, as he presented a deal with technical terms that flew over Gus's head. Still, he listened, something in Langston's manner raising his suspicion. As Langston continued his pitch, Gus noticed a paper barely visible under Langston's briefcase. It seemed out of place, almost as if he wanted to hide it. His heart raced, but he pushed down his nerves and spoke up. "Ma'am, I think there's something under Mr. Langston's briefcase you might want to see." The room went silent as Langston's smirk faded. He quickly tried to cover the paper, but Mrs. Fontaine's keen eyes had already noticed. She ordered him to move the briefcase, and he reluctantly complied, revealing a hidden agreement that could have cost her company its most valuable assets. With the truth exposed, Eugenia turned to Gus with gratitude, her respect for him visibly deepening. "Thank you, Gus," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "I'm certain I wouldn't have uncovered this without you." As the meeting concluded, Gus left the room with a sense of purpose and pride. He wasn't just a janitor anymore, he was someone who made a difference, someone trusted and respected. And for the first time, he believed he truly belonged at Fontaine Industries. After that day, things began to change subtly at Fontaine Industries. Gus was still the janitor, still wore his cap and his dusty work clothes, but people started looking at him differently. Some would nod respectfully as he passed by. Others would go out of their way to greet him, curiosity evident in their eyes, as if they wanted to know more about the man who had been called upon by the most powerful woman in the company. Mrs. Fontaine had not only kept her promise but gone further. Within a few weeks, she gave Gus an official title: Consultant of Observational Insights. It sounded grandiose to him, but Eugenia assured him that his role was exactly what the company needed. "Your perspective is valuable, Gus," she explained over tea one afternoon in her office. "You see things others don't, and that's something I can't afford to lose." Though unsure of what observational insights meant, Gus took his new responsibilities seriously. He continued his daily routines, but now he attended meetings on occasion, always listening closely, noticing details others missed. Word spread about his role, and soon people from different departments began approaching him, seeking his observations on everything from workflow to workplace morale. Despite his growing presence, Gus stayed grounded. He still took pride in cleaning and caring for the office, finding a quiet peace in keeping things tidy. And, as the months went on, he also noticed a shift in Mrs. Fontaine. She began inviting him to her home for weekly dinners. He'd sit at her large, polished dining table, feeling slightly out of place amid the fine china and expensive wine. But Eugenia was always kind, sharing stories of her late husband, Gabriel, and the early struggles they had faced together. One evening, as they sat by the grand fireplace in her library, Eugenia confessed something she had never shared before. "You know, Gus, it's been so many years since Gabriel passed, but I've never let anyone close. Until now." Her voice wavered slightly. "There was something about you that reminded me of him, your honesty, your quiet strength." Gus felt a lump in his throat. He never imagined that his presence could mean so much to someone like her. He took a breath, feeling the weight of her words settle over him, and simply said, "I'm here, ma'am, for as long as you need." That moment marked a turning point, not just for Mrs. Fontaine, but for Gus too. He wasn't just a janitor with insights anymore, he was a friend, a confidant, someone who brought a bit of warmth back into the cold spaces of her life. As the company continued to thrive, thanks in part to Gus's unique observations, a new chapter began for them both. Mrs. Fontaine grew less distant, attending company events and occasionally joining her employees in the lounge, surprising everyone with her warmth and wit. And by her side, without fail, was Gus, the man who had quietly turned her world upside down. And in Silvergate, whenever someone asked about the success of Fontaine Industries, the employees would smile knowingly. They'd say it wasn't just about business acumen or high-powered deals. The heart of the company lay in an unlikely friendship between a powerful woman and her humble janitor, who had reminded her, and everyone else, that sometimes the most valuable insights come from the quietest voices. As the years passed, the story of Mrs. Fontaine and Gus became a treasured part of Fontaine Industries' legacy. Their friendship, born from unexpected trust, had woven a new culture into the very fabric of the company, one where every voice mattered, from the janitors to the executives. Employees felt proud to work there, not just because of the business's success, but because they were part of something greater, a company with a soul. Eventually, the day came when Eugenia decided to step back from her duties. Her empire was secure, her legacy assured, and she felt ready to embrace a quieter chapter of her life. At her retirement gala, held in the grand ballroom of Silvergate's finest hotel, she looked out at the sea of faces, her employees, friends, and admirers, and saw Gus near the front, his cap neatly in hand, smiling. In her farewell speech, she spoke of her late husband, of the struggles they had faced building Fontaine Industries, and of the immense pride she felt for everyone who had contributed to the company's success. But near the end, she turned to Gus. "Gus has been a friend, a guide, and a reminder of what truly matters," she said, her voice steady yet full of emotion. "He showed me that true wisdom doesn't always come from a boardroom or a degree. It can come from a simple act of kindness, from integrity, and from a clear view of what's right." The crowd erupted in applause. And Gus, humbled and slightly embarrassed, gave Eugenia a small nod of appreciation. After the speech, as guests mingled, many approached Gus, sharing stories of how his presence and wisdom had impacted them over the years. He listened with his characteristic humility, chuckling and shaking his head when the compliments became too grand. Later that evening, Eugenia and Gus stepped out to the hotel's garden, where the night air was cool and the city lights twinkled. They shared a quiet moment, gazing at the skyline of Silvergate, a city their lives had helped shape in small but meaningful ways. "Thank you, Gus," Eugenia said, her voice soft. "For everything. No need to thank me." "Ma'am," Gus replied, smiling. "I'm just glad to have been here." They stood there in comfortable silence, two friends from different worlds, bound by a connection that neither had expected but both deeply cherished. And as they walked back inside arm in arm, they knew that the legacy they had built together would live on, in the spirit of Fontaine Industries and the hearts of everyone they had touched.